Decades ago, Kentucky became one of the first states to offer civil remedies to people injured by domestic violence. We didn't, however, extend those emergency protections to victims of dating violence. And today we find ourselves one of the last states in the nation without such protections. Unfortunately, violence and the threat of violence are tragic realities for far too many Kentuckians, especially our young women, but also those who are older. For several sessions, we have been discussing these protections. This session, we're going to pass a bill. Today, I'm joined by First Lady Jane Beshear and legislative leaders to announce support for the concepts contained in House Bill 8, legislation which will create a unified, comprehensive system of civil protections in Kentucky for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, abuse, sexual assault, and stalking. House Bill 8 streamlines the protective order process by creating a single interpersonal protective order for victims, allowing them to seek immediate civil protections that put the offender on notice that any further abuse or violation of the order is subject to arrest. It takes the best of what we have now in the way of our civil protection system, and it makes that system work for every identified victim of these most serious crimes. Right now, victims of dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking are limited to remedies within the criminal system. While those remedies are very important, they often don't meet the immediate need for protection for victims of intimate crimes. These victims are at high risk for continued abuse. Often a protective order is enough to get an abuser's attention and deter further abuse. It also provides a level of protection while a criminal case, if there is one, winds through the criminal justice system. A recent University of Kentucky study found that 50% of the women who received a protective order reported that they experienced no violation of the order within 6 months after obtaining it. So the law works, and it needs to work. More than 14% of high school students in Kentucky reported being the victim of dating violence. That's one of the highest numbers in the country. That number only gets worse when our young women go to college. And national studies show that over 1/4 of women over 65 have experienced violence in the hands of a partner. All of these folks deserve better from us. Now, House Bill 8 was sponsored and is sponsored by Representative John Tilley, who chairs the House Judiciary Committee and has been a longtime advocate. His partner in this effort has been and is Senator Whitney Westerfield, chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and those two people deserve a round of applause for all of the hard work that they are doing on this. Thank you. We all care very deeply about this issue, and there may be issues that we can and will deal with as this bill goes through the legislative process. There usually is. But all of us are committed to make sure that at the end of the day, at the end of this session, we will have a bill that for the first time ever in the Commonwealth of Kentucky will protect victims of dating violence. Now, for somebody who has been a passionate advocate for Kentucky's women, let me ask the First Lady, Jane Beshear, to say a few words.
First of all, let me say I'm delighted to see so many people here. There are so many advocates here who have been working toward this for a long time. At the beginning of this administration, I met with representatives of the Kentucky Domestic Violence Association, which is now known as the Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They wanted to educate me about the organization, about their clients, and Kentucky's growing need for domestic violence awareness, intervention, and protection. I was appalled by what I was shown, what I heard. At their invitation, I visited their shelters across the state. I met with many of the women that were in residence, and I met with their children. I heard their stories. These stories were sadly similar. Each of them had been caught in unhealthy relationships that evolved into emotional, financial, and eventually physical abuse. Since then, I've heard this frightening, familiar tale time and again. In our Shop and Share program that we do every year, I've met men and women at the store who tell me the same kind of stories. Last year, when we were debating this issue, I heard from several young women, Mercy High School students. They had come to see what they could do to help. They had formed a support and awareness group after some of their friends had experienced abuse at the hands of dating partners. I've heard from mothers like Pat Byron, who is probably with us here today. She lost her daughter to the rage of an abuser. This abuse, these violent acts, did not develop overnight. Seemingly harmless romantic jealousy transformed over time into an all-consuming control of that victim. So it's during that period that we have an opportunity in that dating relationship time early on, when there is a problem, we have an obligation to provide intervention tools before it's too late. House Bill 8 gives victims immediate civil protection that can help keep them out of harm's way. Without these civil protection, victims are at risk of waiting for weeks or months for criminal protection. Those weeks, those months, their abuser is free to stalk them, terrify them, injure, or even kill them. Would you want your daughter, your sister, your aunt, or your friend in a violent dating relationship? If they were, would you not want immediate protection? Or would you want them to have to wait for the drawn-out criminal proceedings? I'm sure that anyone that is any way related to a victim, and most of us are, would want immediate measures in place to help ensure the safety of their loved one. As the governor said, Kentucky is one of the few states that does not have protection for dating partners. We need to let our abusers know that we will not tolerate violence, and we need to let our victims know that we're on their side. We need to pass dating violence legislation now. Thank you.
Next, let me call on Representative John Tilley. John?
Leader Atkins, thank you for being here. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for being here, and certainly a lot of the leaders who've worked with me and in a group for a long time to be where we are today, and at the precipice of passing the most important piece of legislation I think will pass this session. Again, thank you, my House leadership, the Governor, First Lady, Sandy Overly's here, Johnny Bell, Linda Belcher from the House. I know Joni Jenkins has been a partner. She sponsored this bill many times before it was handed to me for the work we've done on it, Senator Denise Harper Angel, and of course my close colleague and friend Whitney Westerfield. He's shown some tremendous leadership in the Senate, really breaking this piece of legislation loose, and Senate President Stivers deserves that same credit, so thank you for being here, President Stivers. If I've forgotten anyone, my deepest apologies. What can we say about it? We'll hear a lot about the nuts and bolts. We've heard from the Governor about why it's needed and the First Lady. There are any number of numbers and stories you could point to underscore why this legislation is so desperately needed in one of the last states to have it. But one of the many stories I've heard, and I've been to those shelters, Ms. Beshear, and one of some of my good friends here today are from my sanctuary shelter in Hopkinsville, and to talk to some of those ladies and their children is pretty gut-wrenching. But just by way of illustration, one story sticks out to me about why this bill is so needed, and that's the story of a young student at the University of Kentucky who came to me, and she was recruited athletically and academically to be at the university. And she came here with a dark past, and that was a boyfriend who had abused her in another state. And the boyfriend followed her to the University of Kentucky, and he tried to do the same thing there. And because of the order from another state and because of federal law, with full faith and credit, we had to honor that protective order. And so she was given that protection, and that story had a happier ending than some. But take our own student at the University of Kentucky, where 1 in 3 women, according to a recent study, 1 in 3 women, now put that in perspective. I don't like those odds. As a father of 3 girls, I don't like those odds. 1 in 3 women will be victimized on that campus in some way. But we couldn't protect our own student that came from the same type of relationship. So that has to change. As for instance, stalking in the bill, another story sticks out to me from the late 80s. Many of you may remember the TV star Rebecca Schaefer and her stalker, John Michael Bardot. He may be remembered more than her because of what he did to her. But he stalked her eventually to her home. And when she refused him, he came back later. And when she opened the door again, he shot her in the chest and killed her. Now, because of that case, many states, including Kentucky, in the early 90s and late 80s, passed criminal stalking laws, which we have today. And in Kentucky, after a conviction, but only after a conviction, can you get a protective order to protect you from your stalker or your abuser. But what Rebecca Schaefer needed on that afternoon where she was shot in the chest was immediacy. The life-saving part of that would have been immediacy. And therein lies the difference, and therein lies the nuance as to why we need these protections in what has been referred to as the dating violence bill. And so again, when we have numbers that hit us in the face, like 1 in 3 women on a college campus, like 1 in 5 women has either been raped or will have an attempted rape, or 1 in 4 become victims outside a college campus, and over 600,000 victims of domestic violence in this state. Again, I have to tell you, as a father of 3 girls, one who's now a teenager, I don't like those odds. But we can combat those odds and offer the protections these young girls and women need and deserve. So with that, again, I cannot express my appreciation more than I already have to the people who've supported this bill. The advocate community has been unwavering, and the leaders have come together on this like nothing I've ever seen. So thank you so much.
Next, let's call on Senator Whitney Westerfield.
I too want to express my thanks. I'm one of the newest people on this battlefront. There have been a number of others who have been here a lot longer than me, and they've all been named here this morning, including my co-chairman, who was hard at work on this when I got this job. When it was first presented to me, there were various questions I had, but one of the things that popped up is a constant thought that others have when they're presented with this bill. Well, don't we already have protections on the books for these things? And there are charges that people can pursue, but as has been said by the First Lady, it's a pretty high bar to get any of those protections, and it takes an awfully long time, and time is something that these victims don't have much of. That immediacy does not exist. Right now, unless you are married, you cohabitate, or you have a common child, you are not going to get that immediate protection. And the only answer, the only recourse you have is to file a criminal charge with the county attorney or the Commonwealth's attorney and follow that prosecution through, and it could take weeks, months, or a year or more. And what happens in the meantime? Whereas this bill, these protections can help diffuse a situation, make cool tempers. That's before you even get into the cost savings, if you wanted to talk about that, but we're talking about life savings that this bill will accomplish. And as a brand new father of a daughter myself, I don't like those odds any more than you do, Chairman, and I'm happy to support this bill and to move it through. I look forward to getting it in the Senate and working to make sure these protections come out at the end and land on your desk, Governor. And you all applauded for the two of us, but he's been working on this a lot longer than I have, and everybody else has been, including the two of you. So thank you both. And thanks to the advocate community for what you've done, for educating me and educating others, because we've gotten, each year that I've been in the Senate, we've moved further and further along, and I feel more momentum now than I've ever felt. And I feel certain we're going to have these protections. And that makes me feel good about Hadley. It makes me feel good about your girls and the girls across Kentucky. They're finally going to have some safety that they've been denied for too long. Thank you all.
Speaker Greg Stumbo is very supportive of this legislation and would have been here, but he is presenting some legislation of his own right now in front of a committee in the legislative process, so he couldn't be here. But Mary Karen Stumbo, the better half of the Stumbo family, is here to represent him and is supportive of this. And I asked her if she'd like to speak, and she said, I would really rather stand here and be supportive. But thank you, and thanks to the Speaker. Next, I want to call upon President Robert Stivers, the Kentucky Senate.
Thank you, Governor, and everyone that's here. Mary Karen, it could likewise be said for Jane Beshear what was said about you. I also want to say something about years of work on this. I heard Senator Westerfield say that he was the new kid on the block. I think when I first started working on these issues, I think you were 14 when I was in the Senate. So it's starting to make me feel a little bit old. But with that, I want to say this. I think most people know that I pretty much try to call it as I see it, and as I've said on many occasions, if the shoe fits, whether it's good or bad, wear it. But I have been one of the individuals who have looked at this in a little bit different light over the years, because I have been one that wants to make sure that the term of domestic remains the same when you start looking at a protective order. And that there were sanctions, and I do have two daughters likewise, and I understand the realities of a criminal process, but not in any way going to diluting or delineating the difference between domestic and dating. So through this process, I want to say that I have been one that has questioned it, but I want to give a special thanks to these two gentlemen, Senator Westerfield and Representative Tilley, for going about this over the last 6 or 8 months. I think when we initially started this last year in the session, along with the governor's office, of how you could define a specific civil protection in addition to that which was available through the criminal process. And they have done that and have attempted to do that to make sure that people who want this definition of domestic is not expanded, but make sure that individuals who are in a dating situation can have another tier of protections. And I also have to say this, that many people who came to me that have been involved in these situations talked about the realities of criminal prosecutions. Well, I've practiced law for close to 26 years, and I understand what it means for an individual to go get a warrant, appear in court for potential arraignments, discoveries, trials, and then juries, which do, as these two individuals, the two chairmen have talked about, takes quite some time. And there are many people who don't want to go through that process because they feel that process puts them even at risk or even abuses them even more. And that they wanted this attempt at a civil protective order to make sure the individual just stays away and that they go on about their life and feel the protections afforded through this civil process. So I congratulate these two fine, and I say this as one of the older people now in the legislative process, two fine young men that are working on this issue. But I want to finish with this. I want to say, if you want to look in the definitions of class and the epitome of class, let me bring 3 names to your attention. This is an election year, and you have seen the governor and the first lady step up on a very interesting issue, an issue that many people are very concerned about. And in a political year, what the governor and I have talked about on many occasions, setting aside the politics to work with Senator Westerfield. And for all three of them, that is the epitome of class and the way the process should work. So I want to thank them too. Thank you all.
And now I want to call up somebody who probably knows more about this issue firsthand because she deals with it all of the time than any of the rest of us, and that's Darlene Thomas. Darlene.
I'm Darlene Thomas, and I'm here to represent KCADV, and which is Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and KSAP, the Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programs, to speak a little bit, just for a few minutes, about what it means as an advocate. And there are so many advocates out here in this room who have been here every year now. What is it, 7? That we have fought and we have brought our voices and we've been heard, which is so very important all the way across the halls. And it's, I cannot thank you all enough. You know, as advocates, we're charged with that task of helping survivors of interpersonal violence kind of create and wrap themselves in safety. That's what we do. That's what we get up every day to do. We provide the shelter, the counseling, information, all the support, advocacy. We are out in our courtrooms across the state. We are in the hospitals and coffee shops if we need to be. Wherever survivors are is where we try to make sure we're at as well. We are the voice at the other end of the crisis line, that link, that first step for many survivors. They reach out to us in the midst of crisis or immediately following the trauma of rape, domestic violence, stalking, and dating violence. To be effective as advocates, we must be able to provide a host of options so that survivors can explore, contemplate, and use so that they can create a safety plan that will empower them to overcome the many obstacles and often the sense of powerlessness that follow victimization. House Bill 8 increases the options available to these survivors. Protective orders have been proven an effective tool for survivors needing immediate relief and protection from the person who's harmed them. So when House Bill 8 becomes law in 2016, it will be transformative. And it will be transformative for this advocate and advocates across this Commonwealth, because not only for the survivors, but we no longer will have to tell dating violence victims, their parents or their family members, that they or their loved ones are not eligible for protection. There will be no more shocked expressions of disbelief or tears of desperation. Rather, we are going to be able to celebrate. We're going to celebrate Governor and First Lady Beshear, Senate and House leadership, every state senator and representative, members of the judiciary, and community leaders who have helped bring the voice to the unprotected and create a path towards safety for future generations. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Mr. Tilley, the basic structure of EPOs and DPOs under the bill, does that change in terms of the 14 days for EPO and then a hearing, and then a longer-term DBO if the judge rules that necessary?
The basic structure would not change in terms of anything the victim would see under this current version of House Bill 8. It would be called something different. Interpersonal protective order, however, or dating violence order, but in terms of what the victim would see in terms of those time periods and that immediacy of protection, the opportunity to be heard from a respondent standpoint, all those things do not change.
Any other questions? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.